Today I felt like talking about science again. It's been a while. I discussed my my thoughts around all the changes that are happening right now in the U.S. Implemented by the Trump administration in the previous video. So feel free to look at that. But I felt like talking about science because now that I'm kind of out of science. It's been almost like half a year now. I've gained some perspective and I had some time to take some distance to, let's put it like that, my old life as a conventional scientist, immunologist. And I've been reflecting and also, or perhaps dreaming also, what science could look like, because I think that currently, whatever you think about the changes that are happening in the U.S. Science system right now under RFK Jr., whether you think they're good or bad, I don't agree with everything, and I clearly said what I thought was kind of wrong with it in the previous video. But the science system as it currently stands, definitely doesn't represent its highest form. As you know by now, I've kind of have a spiritual point of view, and we talk about highest timelines or highest whatever embodiments for humans, but also entities or living entities like a science system. You can also judge it by its current type of development or stage of development. And I think as it stands right now, it's definitely not even remotely close to what it could be. So I've been reflecting on that and a bit related to what I just said, whether you're looking at human soul development or kind of entities such as political systems or science systems. I think you can apply similar types of developmental stages, and the science system certainly mimics or reflects back the overall level of human development. And right now, science systems are very materialistic. They look at everything from a very mechanical point of view. And I think the humanity is missing, and so I think that there's definitely a massive room for improvement. And as I was reflecting on all that, and making space for it, and now that I have the time to reflect on that, instead of just being just one cog in the system and just writing grants and writing papers. I'm still writing papers, but I don't have that pressure or responsibility anymore to lead a lab. Upon reflection, I feel that what's currently missing in the entire scientific endeavor, and particularly in my field, of medicine, immunology, what's missing is the experiential point of view. And I would argue that the highest level of science is experiential science. And so what do I mean with experiential? To me, and if you're interested, you can read my book, which is on my website. You can read it for free, but my contention is that reality itself is experiential. In that we cannot extract ourselves from it. Science is epitomizes that concept of, oh yeah, well, let's observe something objectively, which is fine. It's fine to have that turn in contention, but that's not completely rooted in reality, at least not in mine or how I perceive reality, because we are part of it. We cannot extract ourselves from it and then observe it from an objective point of view. It's like the analogy of an eye cannot look at itself. You cannot extract from it, even if you want to. You can't. Well, you can attempt to, but you're gonna miss something. it's not gonna be as objective as you think it is. And so as scientists, or the scientific field, the materialistic viewpoint is that, well, we're gonna observe something and put numbers on it and measure things, but that assumes that you can extract yourself from it. You, as an outside point of view, you observing something, and the primary assumption is that you have no impact on it, which is wrong. We know that from quantum physics. Again, all of it, that's based on integration. If you don't want to integrate observations from another field, and you say, well, no, I can definitely extract myself from it, and I can observe something, and I have no impact on what I'm observing. I mean, that's fine. That's your perception of reality, but I don't think that is reality, at least not mine. And it comes back to those key concepts in quantum physics. And again, I'm not like, if you argue that, well, I know quantum physics is quantum physics, it's so abstract that why would we try to integrate that? But my contention is, well, that's the basis of reality. Like, so you basically refusing to integrate it, or you're making a choice not to because it's easier for you, because it doesn't create all these problems. But in those fields of advanced physics, it's a well-known fact that the observer influences the experiment. Now I agree. When you're looking at the very, very small, it is abstract, and it takes like an open mind to even try to think about how to integrate that to a larger scale. Applying the microcosm to the macrocosm. I understand that this is extremely complex, and it tends to break the mind. It's just like, hang on, what? And it changes how you perceive reality, and it's exactly how I came to the conclusions I came to with regards to how I see a reality, because I thought I want to have my own theory of everything. How can I just, even scientifically, objectively, refuse to integrate something that I know based on current knowledge, or highest knowledge, that it's true? How can I just say, well, no, hang on, it's easier not to put that into the equation because that's just gonna break everything. So I never wanted to do that, which created its own set of problems. But at least I perceive that I have, in my reality, everything seems to make sense and everything is inclusive. And another another concept also in advanced physics is that, and that goes very much into spiritual concepts, is that all is mind. Everything is made of mind. The primary fabric of reality is mental. And then of course it applies to something. There's something physical, there's a 3D physical reality associated with it, but the source of reality is mental. And that's a very difficult concept to integrate, because not only is it very, very advanced scientifically, but it's also quite advanced spiritually, because you need to rethink about many things. If suddenly everything is mental and you influence reality, then suddenly you are intrinsically interconnected into everything that happens. And you also are part of whatever you are looking at, whether you're a physicist, a chemist, a biologist, a clinician, a researcher in medicine. These concepts apply. I also want to stress that I don't try to minimize or kind of trivialize all that complex medicine, or that's my field of expertise. That's what I can really talk to. I don't want to trivialize any of it. Like cellular processes and all that stuff. It's extremely complex. Human physiology, immunology are extremely complex fields, and so to some extent there are things that you can observe. but they're also there. How I perceive it is all of that beautiful biology, or all that physiology that we now got to understand through rather observing kind of approaches. To me, they provide the experience. The two are not mutually exclusive. The fact that all is mind, and then suddenly you observe biological realities in a petri dish, or in a patient, or in a human being. These two things are completely interlinked. We are here, souls having a human experience, and how we gonna get experience? Like, even if you have a plan, or if your soul wants to experience specific things, well, the only way you're gonna experience them is through 3D physical reality, and the physical reality has its rules. It doesn't exclude any higher dimensional origin at all. You can choose to look at only, well, 3D physical reality. You can totally choose to live your life like that. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think when we're talking about what is the highest form of science, then suddenly you cannot go past the actual origin of everything, if that makes sense. But it doesn't minimize anything that happens here. What happens here is real. It's just on one dimension, and then you can choose or not to integrate other dimensions to it. But I think the highest form is to bring everything together, and particularly to bring yourself into it. As scientists, we always try to extract ourselves from whatever we're doing. As the observer, I'm the observer that observes something, and I have no effect on it. But that's incorrect. We cannot extract ourselves from it, and that's what's missing, I think, in what I would say would be a higher form of scientific approach. And so what it comes back to is reintegrating us back into it. We extracted ourselves from it for a long, long time, and I think we need to bring ourselves back into it. And I think integration, it's been almost like a logical progression for me, because I've been working in the field of immunology for so long that I've seen things come and go, but particularly come. And I remember the field of immunology as it started, and well, I mean, I wasn't there when it started, but I still got to see kind of very rudimentary like science being done, and now it's like in the last couple of decades, the exponential growth, just in terms of methodology or findings, has been absolutely amazing. But when it comes to integration, as I'm saying, well, we are almost the last part to be integrated. We ourselves, the mind, the mental aspect has to be integrated. That's almost the last piece. But the pieces that came before, as I just like to just talk a little bit about them, so that maybe to you it makes sense as well, that this is the logical progression. So in immunology, if you perhaps a little bit aware of it, we work a lot with animals, with mice, and why mice? You might have heard about like some jokes being made, around the COVID vaccine, and well, it's only been tested on a few mices, as you might see on some some influencers say. I think it was Russell Brand who said, yeah, well, how can you trust something that's been done on 5 mice? Why mice? You might think, why the heck are we doing immunology work in mice? Well, first of all, without a doubt, the human the murine, the mouse immune system is very close to the human one. There's no doubt about that. And then we use a lot of tools in immunology. We're looking at different cells, and we use antibodies as tools to detect specific changes on and within cells. And so we just created an array of tools that is only specific for the mouse in terms of antibodies, tools that we use to analyze immune responses. So we focus so much on the mouse that the amount of tools available for the mouse is just so much bigger than anything else, than if you want to do it on a rat or something else. And the mouse immune system being so close to the human one, that makes the mouse the primary animal to look at for immunological research by far. Any other animals, for instance, if you're looking at fish have also, every animal has some kind of a immune system. Some are more rudimentary than others, but then you might have really big differences. So in terms of mammalian immune system, like the mouse one is as close as it gets to the human. And with the amount of tools, it's a no-brainer to do that research in mice. And also in human, it's kind of very hard to demonstrate causation. If you do basic immunology and you want to prove, this gene is responsible for that, or that protein does X, Y, and Z, the evidence in humans is always going to be circumstantial, because there's no way of proving causation. In the mouse, you knock out the gene, you show what the effect it has, and then suddenly you're good to go. You have causation. And that's worth something, that advances science. I'm not saying anything against it. I've done, my lab has carried its own research on mice, and I'm not really against it. I'm just trying to create a different perspective based on the history of immunology and how it advanced. And there's definitely, among immunologists, we label people like, that guy, he's a mouse immunologist, right? So there's people who dedicate their careers to the study in the mouse. They don't do clinical studies. They don't apply anything. They just do basic immunology in mice. And I'm not criticizing anything. I'm just saying that this is how far it went. That people just don't even, they're so specialized, because you need to be so specialized to get funding and publish well, that you get stuck in the mouse. Or you actually want only to do mouse, because it's easier. You can breed them easily, and you can do all sorts of things. But what I'm trying to get to is the progression, or what we learned. So we learned there were kind of really critical steps of understanding. And so first we realize, sometimes some results are not reproducible between labs. You have the same mouse, genetically identical in different facilities. And I find that if you want to cure cancer in blah, 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 in those mice, this works really, really well. And then someone else tries to reproduce it, and they can't find it at all. It doesn't work for them at all. So one of the progressions or massive steps we've done is regarding the microbiome, so gut bugs, and how critical they are also for reproducibility. So then there are experiments that are really eye-opening, that if you're looking at the same genetically identical mice from different suppliers, have different microbiomes, and then some disease don't even occur in some, and some treatments work in some in the same mouse, genetically identical from one manufacturers, but it doesn't reproduce in another one. So then suddenly we realize, okay, hang on. So we looked at the system from a very in a very simplistic way, just looking at the organism, and now we realize, hang on, we need to bring the gut microbiome, because this is, we call this a meta-organism. A meta-organism is, well, you're not just human, but you have bacteria, you have viruses in your gastrointestinal tract. So that in itself is a meta-organism. You might have worms, you know. So we learn now, okay, we can't just look at just the pure organism. We need to take everything that belongs to that organism into the equation. And I'm not going to go too much detail on everything we learned about the microbiome, but it's absolutely fascinating. And the microbiome can be disease modifying, can be like, you can have microbiomes that create disease, you can have changes in the microbiome that cure disease. It's absolutely fascinating. So you're not just working, so an organism is not working in isolation, it works as a meta-organism. So that's a big one. But still, people were still looking at immunology separately. And then suddenly there was another kind of subfield of immunology that emerged, which was immune metabolism. So the fact that you cannot look at immunology in isolation, even with the microbiome, without looking at metabolism. The fact that you can modify immune function just by metabolic switches. And that was, well, that could be looked at as a purely mechanistic point of view. Well, how does an immune response work? Well, of course, if a cell suddenly needs to be super active, it needs more glucose and blah blah. And what's the origin of inflammation, and what is required for inflammation, and can we find new targets to block inflammation? And these targets happen to be metabolic in nature, instead of just blocking effector molecules or things like that. But then suddenly, if you talk metabolism, you're talking about a whole range of things, right? You're looking at, well, how do you eat? You know, eating impacts metabolism. Your state of being influences metabolism. So then suddenly it becomes more complex, you know. So you're integrating more things into it. You have to bring in other aspects, because looking at your system, immunology in that case, in isolation, just has so many limitations, because it doesn't tell you the entire truth. It doesn't tell you everything. So having a range of patients and saying, well, we found out that this drug or blocking this particular mechanism really works really well, but then it works in some patients better than others, and then, oh well, what microbiome, what microbial distribution have in the gastrointestinal tract, how are these people eating? So you understand that this, to gaining the overall objective, which is human health, the health of humans, you need to bring things back into the equation, because everyone's different. And so we have microbiome, we have metabolism. Now we talk a lot about the interaction between the immune and the nervous system. Now suddenly all these neurotransmitters are interacting with immune cells, cytokines, so these are effectors released by immune cells, interact with the nervous system and have receptors on nerve endings or nerves. So what we've really learned in the last decades is that the more advanced you become, the more you understand that everything works together. And just based on the last thing that I've said, well, cytokines, neurotransmitters, if you would look at it from a purely structural point of view, how these things look, we just arbitrarily said, well, this belongs to the nervous system, this belongs to the immune system, and they don't talk to each other, so that we can simplify the system. Now we understand that it was nice to simplify to get some balls on the board, but now to learn more, we need to bring everything back together. And well, an easy corollary to, well, hang on, the nervous system and the immune system work together. An easy corollary is then suddenly, well, you need to bring the mind in, because what's going to control neurotransmitter secretion and things like that? Of course, it's not just the mind. It's like external environment, stress, everything will impact that system then. And so to really understand, well, if a person comes with a particular disease or has problems, you cannot just look at, well, I assume that based on those experiments that were done in mice for 20 years ago, we can block that and you will have therapeutic success. That doesn't work anymore. You need to bring in everything back together. And that's where I think the future of medicine and, well, I'm an immunologist, but this really, I'm talking about medicine in a greater thing, in a greater sense, is to bring back the mind in, to bring the experiment, the experience, the experiential aspect of things into it. You have a person. How does that person feel, eat? What are them? What's that meta organism? Not just physical, but the thoughts. You need to bring everything back together. And so how would that look like? I think you need to bring in, definitely need to bring in more psychology. And I think it's time to really understand what we call the placebo effect. I've also briefly touched on that in my book. And there's a great book by Joe Dispenza who talks about the placebo effect. And it's arguably the most captured biological effect ever. Because the gold standard of clinical trials is a placebo-controlled study. So it's always captured, but it's never really, it's a nuisance, let's put it that way. If you want to run a clinical study with you developed a new drug, I don't know, you got some capital to launch a new biotech, and you want to you start with clinical studies, and you want to create a blockbuster drug. You want the control group to be as flat as possible, that nothing happens in that control group. So you obviously cannot really, if it's double blind, no one knows what the patient is getting. So you tell them, look, I mean, you might have a sugar solution or like an inert substance, or you might have actually the active ingredient. The doctor doesn't know and the patient doesn't know, so it's double blind. And then you measure responses. And so sometimes, and in a lot of times, I would argue, you see an effect. You see the placebo effect, and that's why you need to control for it, because everyone knows it's real. If it would always be flat, it wouldn't be the gold standard anymore to have that as a control group. But it does exist. That's why we need to control for it, because if the placebo goes a little bit up or down, whatever you want to measure, and the drug does also the same thing. If you wouldn't have the placebo group, you would say, oh yeah, my drug has an effect, but it was just placebo. So that's why it always needs to be integrated with it, because it is real. But I think the future is really to understand it and potentially harness it, optimize it, maximize it. We don't know, like, how. So if I'm saying optimize and maximizing, so in a standard double-blind trial, the patient doesn't know what the patient gets. So it could be the active ingredient, could be just nothing, or something like sugar, whatever. Something that's supposed to do nothing. And then let's assume the patient would have had a response, because the patient gets something from a person in a white coat and feels better about it, because in clinical trials, patients are always very well surrounded, so they're being asked questionnaires. It's not like you just go to normal clinic and get your stuff. It's like you have follow-ups, and you go to the clinic. Sometimes you have to give blood samples, things like that. So you almost feel more important, because you're really taken care of, because you're part of a clinical study. And so it might make you feel better, And then suddenly you feel better, and like, and then you might think, oh my, there's a 50-50 chance that I actually have the active ingredient, so I'm gonna, maybe I really feel better, you know. And so that's the placebo effect. It's purely mind. It's mind control. But you know, maximizing, for instance, would be to see, okay, let's do a trial where we give just placebos. There's no active ingredient in it. And so one side would be, you don't tell them. You say like, we don't know what you're getting, and it would be like a sugar solution. And then let's assume you would have other patients where it's still the sugar solution, but you tell them this is a new drug. So you almost trick them into thinking they're getting something that really works. I would like to see the difference between the two, you know, and trying to see, okay, how much can we get out of this? How well does it actually work if you're maximizing the effect of it? And then there would be other, you know, you would have to study that really, really well, like having really psychological evaluations of these people. Well, we told you that, how did it make you feel, blah, blah, blah. Could we have changed something to make you feel even better? Really understanding, studying how the mind can control the body and maximizing that. That's how I feel the experiential aspect would come into it. We don't treat patients like cars, you know, and you try to change something to the engine or something like that. But you treat them as humans that have feelings. Feelings, there's neurophysiology attached to it. That impacts physiology and immunology. I think that's where I think the highest form of science would be. And also where the really ultimate future is. So not only is there poor integration these days, but it's also, like some people put it, it's creating more ambulances at the bottom of the cliff. You know, we're not trying to prevent shit because there's so much money into curing things, right? Let's put it like that. You know, big pharma is there to cure things. They would hate it if we would start to prevent all the diseases, because they would just crumble. There would be nothing left. And I'm not saying anything about big pharma. You know, I think there's massive value in the research they're doing, and sometimes you need to have an emergency brake or an emergency option to quickly intervene, and that's completely fine. But as a whole, if you're looking at the entire science system, how much is dedicated to prevention versus cure? It's like there's no, the difference is massive. Just because there's more commercial interest in curing things, in having intellectual properties, there's no money in prevention. And actually, it should be the government that should put money into prevention, because it's the healthcare system. At least in countries where you have a public healthcare system, you should put most of it in prevention. That's going to give you the biggest return on investment. And so, yeah, but it's also logically part of that integration step, you know, understanding how mental health and the experiential aspect of human living, how that impacts also on disease, triggering disease or creating disease, and acting before disease actually happens. That's also part of it. So reallocation of funds, I think. There's no doubt, we have, you know, massive epidemics, you know, autism, cancer, a range of other things that could potentially be prevented if we understood really what's triggering them. But that would also require to be completely objective about are there actually commercial interests that are blocking prevention, just because we're trying to. A lot of companies try to sell things that are not necessarily healthy. So you can think about it, you can think whatever you want about the changes that are happening right now in the US, but definitely a very positive change is that there's more emphasis on prevention. Instead of just finding more cures, like, okay, can we actually figure out what creates all these all these diseases. And there's always going to be disagreement of what you think the origin or the cause of disease is. Absolutely. But at least someone saying, well, hang on, can we just figure out why we have all diseases? Because I haven't heard that in a long, long time. So I think that's a very positive development, wherever it leads. If they're following things that are untrue, but I guess, well, hopefully we'll figure it out and say, well, that wasn't the origin, so we need to look at the origin somewhere else. If we can find the origin. And so that's where I see, that's my dream. I don't see this going really in that direction, but that's my dream, that we bring back the experiential aspect. We bring ourselves back into the equation. We're not just machines. The mental aspect is just the tip on the iceberg. I'm already thinking, higher experience, like from a soul's perspective, what are we here to experience? What can we influence? Because if you think that if you have a particular disease, if you believe that you can cure yourself, and I believe that there is something to that. Unfortunately, it's just anecdotal, but there are so many accounts of people that heal themselves. This isn't studied at all because there's no money in it. I think it should be studied to see if there's something to it. I'm not saying this is true, but there's enough anecdotes out there to warrant some kind of investigation. But the problem is there's no money in it. So the science system should be following those things, because this is, from an objective point of view, this is too important. You cannot just leave research to commercial enterprises, because it's always going to be dominated by money. So let's assume for a second that this is true. You can somehow cure yourself. I believe that if you go all the way up, it's your higher self that there is some healing on a higher dimension that translate into a healing on a lower dimension, on a bodily dimension, on a physical 3D dimension. But everything is still connected. So what is the biological mechanism to translate that higher healing into a physical healing? That's what experiential science would be. It integrates the entire experience of being human, integrating all your different dimensional identities into one. So this is a dream, and maybe one day we'll reach there. In the meantime, I've been thinking a lot about my career and the fact that I'm now building my own platform, my own business, so to speak. And every once in a while, I look for what kind of jobs are out there in the field of immunology. There's certain websites you can go there. There's academic positions about specific aspects of immunological research that I would be a good candidate. My CV is appropriate. But I felt that recently, when I did that, I looked at job offers and job openings, and consistently I felt that energetic contraction. I felt that going back to the grind, to funding applications, to trying to explain to people the worth of my ideas. A lot of times people who wouldn't necessarily be expert in the field would have to see how good my ideas are. All of it was just a big no-no. It's just energetically it felt like a contraction, and that for me, I'm in a phase in my life where it's too important for me. I listen to that, the energetic signature of decisions in my life is too important. I'm it's like a compass. I'm not going anywhere where it feels like a contraction. It feels like a step back. It's just I think I'm really I have closure, I think. Everything I've done in academic science had value, tremendous value, because I learned the system really, really well. And I had to see it as a contrast. You cannot see light if you don't have darkness. You need to see contrast. And without experiencing that from being completely immersed in it, I wouldn't have the same opinions now. So it was absolutely instrumental in my development. And I'm even like years ago, when I was already, I had all the understanding, the spiritual and the higher understanding that I have now. I've had it for quite a long time. Still being in the grind, in the science system. But I still thought I have to endure. The system has to be changed from the inside. If I step out, and write books and talk about it, first of all, I had this idea that I lose my credibility, because as soon as you stop publishing, you, as a scientist, people say something, everyone looks you up on PubMed, and what's the last thing these people, that person has published, and if you have been out of the academic science system for a while, it was always my idea that people look at you like, well, you don't have that much weight, because you failed at the system, you didn't make it, blah blah blah. So I always thought I need to endure and change the system from the inside, to blow it up from the inside. But now I tend to think that this was not appropriate to think like that. And I think it's the same thing as for humans. You need to be the change you want to see in the world. So there's nothing ever that you need to attend to or fix or change outside of yourself. And that's my strong belief. And again, it took me a while to get to that belief from a professional side. I always thought so from a human side, but I didn't see necessarily that how this reflects to other aspects of my life. And so I think I have complete closure about not going back to academic science. I'm not close to opportunities if they fully align, if they give me a feeling of expansion, then I would love to be involved in scientific endeavors. But right now I have full closure, and I know that all the developments that I underwent, my own personal ones, that's the most important thing. And wherever it leads me, it's going to lead me. But I don't need to go back to anything that restricts me energetically and also intellectually, because I know too well how it works. So I don't have the urge or the need to go back at all. So yeah, that's what I think. That's what my dream is of where science could be in the future, in the maybe, I'm not sure, distance or near future. But yeah, bringing a more human science, experiential science, bringing all aspects of human experience into medicine. That'd be my dream, and I think it would change so many things. But it would also be tremendously disruptive to society as it's currently built, about all the commercial interests in health. And so I'm looking forward to see how the US is going to change. Could be in a good or it could be in a bad direction. I'm not sure. I don't agree with everything that's happening there. But I kind of enjoy the disruptive aspect of things, because, as I said previously, the science system as it is, it's not it's not good. It's not it's not where we should be. We should be aiming for something else. And So change is necessary. Yeah, I'll leave you with that, and I'll see you very soon. Much love.